6:30 a.m., Ashbourne, Oregon. The small town still slumbered beneath a thin veil of mist. On the quiet cobblestone street, the weathered wooden sign of Maple and Pine Cafe shimmered gently under warm amber lights. Inside the diner, a fluorescent bulb flickered before stabilizing, signaling the start of a new day. Clara Jennings tied back her brown hair in a low ponytail and slipped on a faded blue apron, the same one she'd worn for the past 3 years. She was no longer a dreamer. She rarely mentioned the bachelor's degree in business administration tucked away in a drawer beneath overdue utility bills. Life, for her, had become simple: serve well, earn tips, and try to survive the month. "Table 5, eggs and toast," came the raspy voice of Don Russo, the head cook, from the back, along with the fragrant sizzle of grease rising off the grill. Clara didn't respond. She didn't have to. She lifted 2 plates in a single motion, one in each hand, fluid and precise, like a well-rehearsed circus act. The bell above the door jingled. Familiar customers began to trickle in, like scenes from a play Clara knew by heart. Ted, the retired old man who always complained that the toast wasn't crispy enough. The student couple sharing 1 plate of pancakes as if eating more would break their budget. The construction workers in neon vests lighting up the corner booth like a worksite. "Clara, 1 cup as black as my soul." That gravelly call came from Nora Campbell, the night nurse at the local hospital. Clara poured her a cup and smiled softly. "Another double shift, huh?" "Yeah, the new doctors can't tell a stethoscope from a straw," Nora sighed, but managed a weary smile. Clara didn't have much time to think about herself. Her mind was full of shift schedules, rent due dates, and whether Don would let her pick up an extra shift. But she didn't complain. Everyone had their own burdens. Her choice was to smile, serve with kindness, and remind herself, just get through today. Tomorrow can wait. 10 a.m. The morning rush began to ebb. Clara wiped down the counter in practiced, firm motions. Her gaze drifted dreamily out the window, until the bell chimed again. This time the person who entered wasn't like any customer she had ever seen. An older man with stark white hair, standing up as if he'd just woken, wearing his jacket inside out and his shirt buttoned unevenly. He stood motionless at the entrance, his eyes unfocused, fingers patting his pockets, lips murmuring, "My wallet. I just had it. Someone's waiting for me." Where was it again? The cafe fell silent for a few seconds. Clara froze, a strange tightening in her chest. Something distant, something tender, surfaced in her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but that very moment, when Walter Everhart stepped into the cafe, lost and confused, was also the moment Clara Jennings' life would begin to veer in an entirely different direction. Walter Everhart still stood at the cafe's entrance, like a man who had wandered into a world not meant for him. His beige wool coat was worn inside out, the seams exposed, the tag still clearly visible at the collar. The buttons on his shirt were misaligned, one side higher than the other. But it wasn't these small mistakes that worried Clara. It was his eyes. Pale blue, clouded, wandering dreamily across the room as if searching for a memory that had just slipped away. "My wallet. I had it just now. I'm supposed to meet someone. Susan? Or was it Margaret?" he mumbled. From behind the counter, Rick Bradley Monroe, the cafe manager, stepped out, his usual scowl already in place. He straightened the name tag on his vest and snapped, "Sir, if you're not ordering anything, please don't block the entrance. This isn't a community center." A few heads lifted from nearby tables, then quickly looked away. No one spoke. No one invited the old man in. Clara set the coffee pot down on the counter, wiped her hands on her apron, and moved quickly toward the door, before Rick could escalate things further. "Let me help you," she said, gently placing a hand on Walter's arm. "It's cold outside. Why don't you come in and sit for a bit, warm up?" Walter hesitated, then nodded slowly. I think someone's waiting for me, but I can't remember." "That's okay. Let's sit down first. Maybe it'll come back to you." Clara guided the elderly man to a corner booth by the window, where the morning light spilled softly across the wooden table and slightly worn cushion. She gently helped him out of his coat, turned it right side out, rebuttoned his shirt, like she was caring for her own grandfather. From across the cafe, the owner turned away, pretending not to see. "My name's Clara," she said, setting a hot cup of coffee on the table. "What's yours?" Walter looked up. It took him a moment before he whispered, Walter Everhart." "Nice to meet you, Walter." He gripped the mug with trembling hands, took a small sip and exhaled. A long breath, as if the warmth might calm the quiet panic swelling in his chest. From behind the counter, Rick glared across the room, lips pressed tight. Clara knew that look. She also knew this wasn't technically allowed under cafe policy, but she didn't care, because when she looked at Walter, she saw her own grandfather, the man who used to sit curled up by the doorway asking, "What day is it today?" with the same bewildered expression Walter wore now. A simple gesture, inviting him in, was the first step toward a story she never imagined she'd become a part of. Walter sat still, both hands wrapped tightly around the steaming cup of coffee, as if the warmth was the last thread tethering him to reality. Clara sat across from him, her eyes never leaving his. "Would you like something to eat?" she asked gently. Walter furrowed his brow, his eyes fixed on the menu she had just placed before him. "Margaret. She loved apple pie," he said, his voice drifting as if he were speaking to himself. Clara nodded slowly. "I like apple pie too, sir. The kitchen just made a fresh batch this morning." Walter looked up, blinking as if trying to pierce through the fog of his memory. "Are you Susan? Or Sarah?" No, that's not right. Margaret made the best pies. Better than anyone. For 52 years. Every birthday she'd bake one just for me, even though I always said I didn't need it." He paused, his eyes beginning to redden. "And now, I can't even remember when my birthday is anymore." Clara placed her hand on the edge of the table, her voice warm, like sunlight through the cafe window. "Well then, let's say today is your birthday. I'll bring you a slice of our apple pie in a little bit. See if it's anywhere close to Margaret's, shall we?" Walter let out a faint laugh, a pale, uneven smile warped by age and loss, but in that moment it was real. "You're very kind, but I don't have my wallet. I had it, I swear. I remember bringing it." "That's okay, sir." Clara smiled softly. First slice is always free for first-time guests at Maple and Pine. It was a lie, but it was the kindest lie she had ever told in her life. From the espresso station, Rick narrowed his eyes, arms crossed tightly across his chest. But Clara didn't turn to look. She stayed a little longer, listening to Walter tell his disjointed stories, sometimes about a fishing trip to Silver Lake in 1968, sometimes about a young woman he called Sarah or Susan. No, maybe Samantha. The stories looped, broke apart, then drifted off to some far-off corner of his fogged mind. But Clara stayed, silent and patient. She never interrupted, because she knew what Walter needed wasn't perfect memory. He needed someone willing to stay when everyone else had already left. In a shadowed corner of the cafe, where the early morning light slanted through the condensation-streaked window, a man quietly folded his newspaper. His charcoal grey suit sleeves were neatly pressed, his navy blue tie perfectly knotted, yet no one in the cafe paid him any mind. He sat alone, a black coffee untouched before him, sharp eyes concealed behind thin silver-framed glasses. Lucas Everhart. He was a stranger among the familiar, and he'd been silently watching everything since the moment Walter stepped into the cafe. His hand moved to the inner pocket of his coat and withdrew a dark brown leather notebook, aged but pristine. At the same time, with a stainless steel fountain pen, he began to write. 7:12 a.m., female staff, brown hair tied back, blue apron, name tag, Clara, initiates contact with elderly man. Shows no irritation when he repeats himself. Aware he has no money, still chooses to serve him. Offers free slice of apple pie. No justification given, no hesitation. Lucas looked up again. His eyes settled on Clara, still seated beside Walter, gently fixing the inside-out coat, nodding patiently as she listened to his fragmented memories. 8:04 a.m., employee. Clara pauses her duties to sit and listen to elderly man's stories. Shows no signs of impatience, never checks the time, never interrupts. From behind the counter, Rick glanced over, his gaze clouded with suspicion and disapproval. Lucas added, Manager, Rick Monroe, observes from a distance. Does not intervene, but clearly displeased. His eyes scanned the cafe. Other customers had returned to their breakfast. No one noticed Walter, except Clara. And in that noisy, indifferent world, he penned one final line into his notebook. She is the only one who sees him as a person, not a problem. Lucas set the pen down, took a sip of his coffee. Bitter, lukewarm, and entirely irrelevant. He had seen enough. Another test. And this time, something in his eyes softened, not because of the coffee, but because of the young waitress who reminded him why his father had founded the Maple and Pine Cafe chain in the first place. A place not just to serve food, but to serve dignity. 10:08 a.m. The morning sun had retreated from the register counter, leaving a cold patch of light against the far wall. Clara was wiping down a table when Rick Monroe's voice rang out from behind the counter, cold and sharp, like the surface of stainless steel. Clara, office, now. She looked at him, then back at Walter, still quietly eating his apple pie, hands trembling with every bite. She gave a slight nod and followed Rick into the small back room, where the work schedule hung next to an inventory sheet and a frayed set of house rules. The door closed behind them. No natural light, only a flickering fluorescent bulb and Rick's scowling face. "What do you think this is?" he snapped, holding up a stack of paper reports. "A charity kitchen. 1 slice of pie, 3 cups of coffee. Do you have any idea what that does to our end-of-month numbers?" Clara didn't answer right away. She looked him straight in the eye, no lowered gaze this time. He didn't even know where he was, Rick. He's lost, confused, cold, hungry. Anyone who walked past him could see that. "If you see that," Rick growled, "you call social services. You don't start playing Mother Teresa with company resources. We serve paying customers here, not people," Clara interrupted, gently but firmly. Rick narrowed his eyes, his lips pressed into a razor-thin line. "Who do you think you are, Clara? Some kind of savior?" You're not paid to be a doctor, a therapist, or a guardian angel. You're paid to deliver orders. On time. Clara slowly untied her apron and placed it on the chair behind her. I'm paid to be a human being, and if this system doesn't allow me to be one, then the system is broken. Rick's face darkened, but Clara was already walking out, leaving behind a room heavy like an invisible checkpoint. She returned to the dining floor, slipped the apron back on like armor. Walter was still there, looking up at her as if every time he saw her was the first and only moment he felt safe. Rick followed, standing stiffly near the counter, his face flushed red with fury. You just lost tips from 3 tables because of that one. Clara didn't turn around. She simply set a fresh cup of coffee in front of Walter, her voice quiet but clear. Some things are worth more than tips, Rick. Like a person who isn't forgotten. The midday sun slanted through the cafe windows, casting soft, uneven patches of light and shadow across the table where Walter Everhart sat, illuminating his tousled white hair and the frail hands clumsily gripping a spoon. Clara Jennings gently placed another napkin on the table. As her hand brushed lightly against his wrist, Walter paused and looked up. Clara, he asked, as if suddenly recalling a familiar name from the fractured corridors of his memory. She smiled. Yes, it's me. I brought you a little vanilla ice cream. Tastes even better with the pie. Walter nodded, slowly spooning a bite. As the ice cream touched his tongue, his eyes lit up, briefly, like sunlight breaking through a foggy rain. Margaret loved vanilla ice cream, he murmured, his gaze drifting somewhere far away. She always asked for 2 scoops, even when the doctor told her not to. Clara sat beside the table, setting aside her order pad for now. Would you tell me more about her? She asked, her voice soft and steady. Walter looked at her, hesitating. Then, as if a door quietly creaked open, he began to speak. We met at an old bookshop. She asked me about the bridges of Madison County, but she got the author wrong. I corrected her. She was mad, but still invited me for coffee. His voice was even, though sometimes it faltered, sometimes a word slipped his mind. But Clara didn't interrupt. She nodded, smiling gently when he spoke of Margaret burning a pie and blaming the oven. The memories were broken, scattered, but the most important part remained. The love. By now some of the other diners had started to notice. A few glanced over, some smiled, some shook their heads, but no one said a word. Clara refilled his coffee. Walter had just finished recounting the 3rd story, how he broke his arm during a skiing trip, when he suddenly looked down at the almost finished slice of pie, then back up and asked, Who are you again? Clara didn't flinch. She'd grown used to the question over the course of the morning. I'm Clara. I work here, but today I'm the one listening to your stories. Walter smiled, a brief, fleeting smile, but it was real. Thank you, Clara. Clara gently held his hand. You're welcome, Walter. From behind the counter, Rick glanced at the clock again. But this time Clara didn't care, because she knew that at table 6 of this small-town cafe, the slice of apple pie was not just dessert. It was a tiny ticket back to a slowly fading past, and the fragile thread still holding a man back from disappearing entirely into forgetting. The lunch crowd at Maple and Pine Cafe had begun to thin. A few patrons paused to pay at the counter, while others lingered, sipping the last of their coffee. Clara Jennings moved with her usual quiet agility, refilling cups, nodding politely, and returning to Walter's table in between. Would you like more hot water, sir? She asked. Oh. Clara, come here. Walter smiled, though something distant flickered in his eyes. "Margaret always gave me chamomile tea after lunch. Do you—" Clara didn't answer right away. She gently took his hand, warm and steady. "I'll try to make it just like she did." But before she could walk away, a sharp throat clearing cut through the air, coming from the narrow hallway at the back. Rick Monroe, the manager, stood there, chin raised, finger pointing silently toward the office. "What is it, Rick?" Clara asked, keeping her voice calm. Rick didn't reply. He simply stepped back into the room. Clara looked at Walter, gave a soft nod, and followed. The door closed behind her with a cold, hard click. Rick's office was cramped, smelling faintly of stale coffee and damp paper. On the desk lay a printed form, and beside it, the lunchbox she had packed that morning, now pushed aside like an unnecessary item. Rick didn't waste time. "You're fired. Effective immediately." Clara froze, but she wasn't surprised. It was simply confirmation of what she'd already sensed. "Reason?" she asked, eyes fixed on the paper. Rick sat down, arms crossed. "Policy violation, unauthorized meal given to non-paying customer. Disruption of service, delays to paying guests. Behavior inconsistent with a professional environment." Clara gave a soft laugh, not sarcastic, just quiet, like someone with nothing left to say. She sat across from him, unfastened her cream-colored apron, and folded it neatly on the table. "For a slice of apple pie, and a little kindness." Rick shrugged. "We're running a business, not a shelter. Sentimental actions like yours drag down the whole team's performance." Clara looked him square in the eyes. "Or maybe people like you drag down human value in the name of performance." Rick's jaw tightened. "Sign here." She took the pen. Her hand didn't tremble as the nib passed over the words termination form. When she finished, she stood, slung her bag over her shoulder, but didn't leave right away. She turned back and placed her lunchbox on Rick's desk. "If someone ever comes in hungry and short on money, give them this. Maybe one day someone will remember you as a man who once had a heart." She opened the door and stepped out. Walter was still at his table, tapping softly on the wood as if trying to remember something. Clara approached and leaned down beside him. "I have to go now, Walter." He looked up, face briefly clouded with confusion, then it softened. "You're Clara?" She smiled. "Yes, and I'm really glad I met you today." She placed a hand on his shoulder, gave it a gentle squeeze. "Someone will come to help you, but if no one does, just remember, today you weren't alone." Walter nodded, eyes beginning to glisten. Clara stepped out of Maple and Pine Cafe, leaving behind the chime of the door, an empty seat, and a system that had just lost the most valuable thing it ever had. Rain had been falling over Ashbourne since 3 p.m., a heavy, lingering first-of-the-season downpour, cold and unrelenting, much like Clara Jennings's mood as she quietly returned to her third-floor apartment. Clutching the bag that held her old apron and a few personal items, Clara climbed the damp concrete steps, rain dripping from the ends of her hair down the collar of her sweater. Her apartment was neither warm nor bright. Only the soft amber glow of a desk lamp lit one corner of the room, accompanied by the mocking tick-tock of a wall clock. Clara sank into her worn-out sofa and opened the lunchbox she was supposed to eat mid-shift. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her vacant eyes staring out the rain-streaked window where cars rushed past through the curtain of grey. At 5:47 p.m., her phone buzzed on the table, its screen lit up with an unknown number. Clara hesitated for a moment, then picked it up. Hello? On the other end came a male voice, calm, deep, polished, and composed. Apologies for calling late. Am I speaking with Clara Jennings? Clara straightened up. Yes, this is she. Who's calling? The voice responded after a brief pause. This is Lucas Everhart. I believe you met my father today, Walter Everhart, at the Maple and Pine Cafe. A small jolt ran through Clara's body. Her fingers tightened around the phone, and she held her breath for a moment before asking, Is he all right? Lucas replied gently, He's fine, thanks to you. And actually, he's been asking to see you again. Before Clara could respond, Lucas continued, I'm currently outside your building. If it's not too much trouble, I'd like to speak with you in person. Just for a few minutes. Clara jumped from the sofa and walked to the window. Under the glow of a street lamp, a sleek black sedan sat quietly in front of the building. A man in a long coat leaned against it, phone to his ear, eyes lifted toward the darkened row of windows above. It was him. You really came? Clara whispered into the phone, barely believing her own ears. Lucas gave a small smile through the receiver. I know this is unexpected and may feel intrusive. If you'd prefer, I can return tomorrow. Clara glanced at her reflection. Tired face, dark under-eye circles, hair still tousled from that morning's rain. And yet a quiet curiosity had begun to stir inside her, along with the sense that something wasn't ordinary. No need. I'll come down, she said. Clara grabbed her coat, slid into her still damp canvas shoes, and began descending the stairs, heart pounding with questions she hadn't yet formed. And she had no idea that just minutes from now her life would turn onto a path no one could have foreseen. The apartment door closed behind Clara, leaving the rainy blur of Ashbourne's evening cloaking the street in a misty veil. Under the soft amber glow of the street lamp across the road, a middle-aged man turned at the sound of footsteps. He wasn't tall, but his stance was solid. A charcoal wool coat, a neatly wrapped ash-grey scarf. But what made Clara pause for a moment was his eyes. Pale blue and cloudy, exactly like Walter's, but clear, focused, and sharp as a still lake on a windless day. Ms. Jennings, the man asked softly. Clara nodded. Yes, and you must be Lucas Everhart? He smiled. A proper smile, neither patronizing nor overly polite, just enough to put someone at ease. Thank you for coming down. I know today's been a long one for you. Clara tightened her hands in her coat pockets, trying to keep her voice steady. I only did what anyone should have done. Lucas tilted his head. I'm not sure many people would see it that way. In fact, today you did something my entire system hasn't been able to do for years. She looked up. System. Lucas gestured politely toward the car. Perhaps I could invite you to sit inside, not to talk business, but to tell you a story. One that began long before you served that slice of apple pie to my father. Clara hesitated for a beat, but between the steady patter of rain on the car roof and the cold wind sneaking down her collar, she nodded. The black sedan opened. Inside it was warm with the scent of real leather, a gleaming dashboard, and a strange hush, as if it existed in a world far removed from the worn-down cafe she'd been fired from that morning. Lucas slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the engine. He simply leaned slightly toward the wheel, voice low and even. Clara, I oversee the entire Maple and Pine chain, 48 locations, over 1,200 employees across 6 states. But I'm not the founder. The man who built it all was my father, Walter Everhart. Clara turned slightly to face him. Lucas continued, "Lately he's been slipping, early-stage Alzheimer's." And as I watched him begin to forget even the smallest things, I started asking myself, the system he left behind, does it still hold on to the one thing that mattered most? Clara whispered, "Kindness." Lucas gave a soft laugh, his first, edged with a trace of bitterness. "Exactly. I've said it so many times, serve with heart, in executive meetings. But one day I had to wonder, if the man who built all this returned as a lost old man, would anyone still see him as a person?" Clara stayed silent. The question pierced her, echoing everything she had lived through just hours before. Lucas turned toward her, his gaze no longer merely analytical. "I took him to 17 different branches. All of them failed. Until today. When he sat in Maple and Pine, cold, confused, trembling, only one server came forward. She didn't ask if he had money. She didn't check for a reservation. She simply asked, 'Would you like a hot cup of coffee?' Clara lowered her eyes, murmured, 'I just saw someone who needed a conversation.' Lucas nodded. And sometimes one kind person is stronger than every performance metric. You didn't know it, but I was there today. I was the man in the corner behind the newspaper, and you taught me and my entire company a lesson no training seminar ever could." Clara Jennings, the woman fired over a slice of pie, had no idea. She was stepping into something far bigger than the little cafe she once called her workplace. Inside the warm car, Clara sat in stunned silence for a few seconds after Lucas spoke. She still couldn't fully grasp it. The man she had offered a slice of apple pie wasn't just a lost elderly stranger, but the founder of the entire Maple and Pine chain. Lucas reached into a small leather case on the back seat and pulled out a tablet. On the screen, he brought up several security camera clips, footage from different cafe branches. He held it out to Clara, his eyes never leaving her as he spoke. "I took my father to 17 locations over the past 2 months. No one knew who he was. No one was warned. I just wanted to see what remains when the business cards and titles are stripped away." Clara looked at the screen. One clip showed Walter entering another Maple and Pine cafe, confused and lost. An employee turned away. A manager gestured for him to leave if he wasn't ordering. Another called security. Lucas quietly swiped to the next clip. Another branch. Walter sat silently at a table by the window. Employees passed him repeatedly. No one stopped, no one asked. His face was vacant, his eyes clouded and heartbreakingly alone. All of those places, Lucas said softly, had signs that read, "Serving with hospitality." But when a lost elderly man needed help, they chose distance. They chose policy over heart. Clara swallowed hard, a lump forming in her throat, a mix of helplessness and grief. Lucas looked at her, his expression now serious. "I don't blame them entirely. They were only repeating what this company's culture has unconsciously encouraged: speed, process, efficiency. But I forgot something my father once taught me." "What was that?" Clara asked quietly. Lucas leaned back slightly, recalling, he used to say, "A good cafe isn't the one with the perfect food. It's the one where the weakest in society still feel welcome." Clara turned toward Lucas, her voice steady. "He was right." Lucas smiled. "And you were the only one who lived by that. Not for a paycheck, not for a bonus, not for a title. Simply because you saw a human being who deserved to be treated like one." Clara lowered her head, eyes beginning to sting. Lucas continued, "You didn't know it, but today I wasn't just accompanying my father, I was looking for something this company had lost. He reached for the worn leather notebook resting by the gear shift and flipped through several pages filled with handwritten notes. Employee reaction, body language, manager's response, time taken to engage with elderly guest. I thought I was testing employees, but in truth, my father was testing me. Lucas paused, then turned to Clara, his eyes brighter than the headlights glowing beyond the windshield. "And you're the first person to pass." A quiet wave passed between them, not awkward silence, but the kind of pause that acknowledged something deeper. Between two people, one who had just lost her job and one who had just rediscovered the soul of his company. They had found each other at the exact moment the world needed it most. And Walter's quiet test, though it had begun in silence, had awakened more than just one heart. Clara Jennings was still reeling from the story she had just heard. Lucas Everhart set the notebook down, then looked directly at her. Not with the analytical gaze of a corporate executive, but with the respect of someone extending an invitation to an equal. "I'm not asking you to return as a server," Lucas said, his voice calm but resolute. Clara furrowed her brows. "I wouldn't expect you to," she replied softly, her voice still tinged with caution, like someone bracing for the kindness to disappear at any moment and reality to return. Lucas gave a small, good-natured laugh, not mocking but warm. "I'm not asking you to go back to that Maple and Pine location. I'm asking you to come to our company headquarters in Portland. I want you to become Director of Compassion Training for the entire Everhart Hospitality Group." Clara's head lifted. She was sure she'd misheard. "You said director?" she asked slowly. "That's right. A new title. One that's never existed before," Lucas explained. "But after today I realized no department matters more than teaching people how to truly see people." She looked at him, her disbelief unhidden. "I've never trained anyone. I've never managed anyone. I'm just—" Lucas held up a hand, gently but firmly cutting her off. "You are not just anything. You're the person who did the right thing, when there were no cameras, no incentives, no supervisor watching. And that's something that can't be taught. But I believe you can inspire others to learn it." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat and handed her a thick envelope. Inside is the formal offer. Starting salary of $92,000 per year, with full benefits, relocation support, and stock options if the program expands successfully after 12 months. Clara opened the envelope, her hands trembling slightly. She had never seen a number like that, especially not on the same day she'd worried about making next month's rent. "Why me?" she asked, still unable to fully believe it. Lucas looked at her, and for the first time his eyes softened completely. "Because when my father, Walter, came home this afternoon, even though he couldn't remember the name of the cafe or how to get home, he remembered one thing. He looked at me, held my hand and said, 'There was a little angel who gave me apple pie today.'" The words caught in Clara's throat, and in that moment every ounce of fatigue from the shift, every tear she had swallowed after being fired, was washed away in the warmth of that memory. Lucas stood, opened the car door, then turned back to her. "Tomorrow morning I'll send a car to take you to Portland. If you say yes. And if you need more time, just call me. But in my view, this company can't move into its next chapter without people like you leading the way." Clara nodded. Not a promise, not a refusal, just a quiet nod, like someone who had finally seen herself reflected, clearly, for the very first time. She was no longer the server who had been fired over a slice of apple pie. She had just been invited to redefine hospitality for an entire nation. The next morning at Maple and Pine Cafe, Ashbourne Branch, the atmosphere felt different. Strange, as if something had shifted. Bradley Monroe, still wearing his crooked tie and holding the time card folder under one arm, walked into the office as usual, until he spotted an ivory envelope neatly placed on the desk. A red stamp on the front read, "From the office of the chairman, urgent." He frowned, tore it open, and read. Within 30 seconds, the color drained from his face. The letter was brief, just a few lines. "We thank you for your contributions. However, as of today, the position of branch manager at Ashbourne will be restructured. You no longer align with Everhart Hospitality's new human-centered direction." Lucas Everhart. Bradley raised his hand, ready to throw the letter aside, but stopped. Outside the office, employees had begun to gather. They watched him step out, his face stripped of its usual arrogance. No one clapped, but no one looked surprised either. Meanwhile, at headquarters in Portland, Clara Jennings stepped into the large conference room on the 17th floor. For the first time, but without a trace of fear. A long boardroom table, over a dozen senior managers, all seated with notepads ready. But when Lucas entered and made the introduction, "This is Clara Jennings, new Director of Compassion Training for the entire system." No one asked about her degree. No one questioned her credentials. They had heard the story. They knew her name. 3 days later, at the same Maple and Pine Cafe, the staff gathered for an unusual meeting in the late afternoon. On the announcement board hung a new poster, "Redefining Customer Service Through Kindness." And the person standing in front of the room wasn't a professional trainer. Not a corporate executive, but a woman who once stood behind this very coffee counter, wearing a faded apron and now a name embossed in gold foil, Clara Jennings, Compassion Director. She smiled and began her first session. "I'm not here to teach you how to carry trays or pour the perfect cup of coffee. I'm here to ask you something simple. When someone walks through those doors, do you see a customer, or do you see a human being?" The room fell into a hushed silence. Bradley Monroe was gone, for good. But what Clara had planted was beginning to take root. 3 weeks later, at the Langford Plaza Hotel, one of Portland's most prestigious venues, the media and press had gathered in full force. The stage was lined with a soft grey carpet, the Everhart Hospitality logo gleaming on a white backdrop, accompanied by a new slogan never before made public, "We serve with heart." Lucas Everhart stepped up to the podium. No assistant, no cue cards. He looked directly into the cameras, unflinching. "I'm not here to talk about last quarter's profits. I'm not here to talk about expansion strategy, shareholder returns, or dividends. Today, I want to tell you a story about a father and about a server." Flashbulbs flickered as he spoke, recounting how he had taken his father, Walter Everhart, the founder of the Maple and Pine chain, on a silent test through multiple locations. About how the old man had been ignored, dismissed, even mistaken for a vagrant and turned away. But then his voice slowed as he came to Ashbourne. At one small branch, there was a young woman named Clara Jennings who saw what an entire system had forgotten. That before we are customers, we are human. She didn't just serve a slice of apple pie, she served dignity. And because of her, I was able to see my father's company with new eyes. Below, the cameras panned to the front row, where Clara Jennings sat in a simple white blouse, her expression calm. Beside her sat Walter, thinner now, but holding her hand tightly. Lucas continued, "Starting today, we are rolling out compassion training across our entire system. We will no longer hire managers who believe difficult customers are part of the job. And we will begin again by listening." He paused, then delivered a closing line that brought the entire room to silence. "I once ran a restaurant empire. Now I will lead a place where my father, and anyone like him, will be called by their name. Not stranger, not nuisance, but Walter Everhart." Applause broke out, at first scattered, then thunderous. Clara squeezed Walter's hand tightly. The story was no longer just about a small-town cafe, it had become a public declaration. Kindness isn't just a nice gesture. It's a core business principle. 1 week after the press conference, at the headquarters of Everhart Hospitality in Portland, a special internal ceremony was held. Not grand, but warm and dignified. Regional directors, department heads, and representatives from branches across 6 states had gathered, not to hear a strategic business speech, but to welcome a human being. Clara Jennings stepped onto the modest stage in the main hall, no longer the server from a small-town diner. Today, she stood as the director of system-wide compassion training. Lucas Everhart was already waiting beside the podium. He held no microphone, no printed speech. He simply spoke one sentence as Clara approached. "We didn't hire a trainer. We invited someone who did the right thing, even when it came at a cost." Applause rippled through the room. Lucas turned to Clara and extended his hand, but this handshake wasn't like any other employee welcome in company history. It wasn't a gesture between executive and staff. It wasn't between a chairman and the head of a new program. It was between someone who had once been a silent victim of the system, and the person now changing that very system. Clara did not bow her head. She shook Lucas's hand with a straight back, her eyes unwavering. The handshake lasted longer than usual. No one urged them to move along. No one pushed the agenda forward. Everyone simply rose to their feet, clapping, as if they were witnessing a transfer of not power, but principle. Behind them, the new company logo appeared on the big screen. Maple and Pine, where service begins with empathy. Not a slogan, but a promise. Clara Jennings's first morning in her new role didn't begin at corporate headquarters with premium coffee and a 6-figure salary. She returned to Maple and Pine Cafe in Ashbourne, the place where it all began. Not to serve, not to show off, not to be applauded, but to look at the chair by the window, where an old man named Walter Everhart once sat, with his coat on inside out and eyes lost in the noise of the world. That chair was still clean today, still left empty. No one had taken it, even during the morning rush. A small wooden plaque had been mounted on the wall behind it, engraved with a simple line, "Reserved for someone who needs to be seen." Clara stood beside the chair, watching the sunlight stretch across the floor through the big glass window. Outside, the street buzzed with people and traffic. But inside this cafe, once a silent battleground of prejudice and neglect, there was now space for acceptance and understanding. Bradley Monroe, the former manager, was no longer there. In his place stood a young woman, recently promoted from part-time staff. Clara nodded to her, handing over a new guide. Not a service manual, but the first training document on compassion, written by Clara herself. Then she turned toward the door. On her way out, she paused at the counter and placed a sealed envelope on the surface. Addressed to a staff member she had once seen, bow their head in silence while witnessing injustice. Inside was a note, "Would you like to help lead our first compassion workshop?" She knew she couldn't change everything in a day. But today, a door had opened, not through job titles or nameplates, but through one simple act: seeing someone when everyone else had turned away. Clara left the cafe without looking back. Ashbourne sparkled with morning sunlight, and behind her, in a little diner on a city street, an empty chair waited for the next person who needed to sit down. Not to place an order, but to be heard. Clara Jennings didn't change the world with a speech. She didn't stand in a crowd, hold a sign, or demand reform. She simply poured a cup of coffee, served a slice of apple pie, and sat across from a human being, not to serve, but to listen. And that alone was enough to shake an entire system. In an age where kindness is often mistaken for weakness, Clara reminded us that humanity isn't a cost, it's a foundation. This story doesn't end with an apology, it ends with a commitment. That from now on, when someone walks into a cafe, a bank, a clinic, or any doorway, they will no longer have to ask to be seen, because someone already did. Someone stood up, someone got fired, and in doing so, redefined what it means to serve. And if you've ever wondered whether a small act can make a difference, remember this: a slice of apple pie, a hand on the shoulder, a question: would you like to sit down? That's how the world begins to change. One person begins, and the rest becomes history.